4. Spid and Grandpa. Grandpa Pratt came to stay once or twice a year, usually in the summer. He was a pink and white old gentleman, his face surrounded by fluffy whiskers. He had very blue eyes and a mouth which he used very little except for grumbling and eating. Nobody ever heard him say thank you, yet no one could call him ungrateful, for he had a little flip of his fingers and a nod of his head that said it for him. Mrs. Gridley called him a dear old gentleman. Before he arrived, the house was turned upside down, making a bedroom for him downstairs. Henry thought this was better than turning out of his own bedroom, as he did for Grandma, his mother's mum, who refused to sleep on the ground floor. She said people could look at her through the window, and she never had any faith in lace curtains. Fortunately, the two of them never came to stay at the same time, and these were the only grandparents Henry had. He warned Spid that spiders were likely to be unpopular with both his relations. "But I only want to be friends," grumbled Spid. "Well, just be friends all by yourself in a corner," Henry advised him, "because Grandpa may look old and helpless, but he has got ever such a long reach with a newspaper. He smashed up my model aircraft when it flew round his head, and you would never have thought he could get near it." Spid went and sulked in Henry's room. He felt jealous when he heard Henry's mother making a fuss of the old gentleman. "We've put you downstairs, Grandpa," she told him when he arrived. "We knew you would find the stairs trying with your legs." "There's nothing wrong with my legs," Grandpa retorted. "It's my knees that are stiff, that's all, and I can easily sleep upstairs. You can put the boy downstairs. He'll be out of my way." "Oh, Grandpa, and last time you made us change it all when you went to bed," protested Mrs. Pratt at her wit's end. "That was last time," snapped Grandpa. "Besides, the spiders came in from the garden, and I hardly got any sleep at all." "There," Henry muttered to Spid. "You heard what he said. Now you keep right out of his sight, do you hear?" "I only wanted to be friends," grumbled Spid. But before they could change all the arrangements again, Grandpa decided that he did not want to sleep upstairs after all. To everybody's great relief, he settled down in the lower room and closed all the windows. Henry did not see very much of his grandfather, who got up at about 10:30 in the morning and retired soon after 7 at night, drinking hot drinks at 11, coffee at 2, tea at 4, with nice little meals on trays at 1 o'clock. He had his evening meal in bed. As a grandfather, he was a failure, Henry thought, but at least it was something that Mrs. Gridley's Norman could not be jealous about, even though he had no grandpa of his own. The boys spent much of their free time together, and on Saturday morning, when they had gone off to fish, Spid left the shelter of the house to take a turn in the garden by himself, since it was a pleasantly fine and sunny day. He ambled and rambled round the borders, making little darts sideways to make the ants and ladybirds jump, or dodging any hungry-looking blackbirds and thrushes that stopped their singing for a brief moment in search of some refreshment. In between times, he basked in the sunshine underneath a warm stone, or idly spun a web round and round a sunflower stem, before making a still wider loop round the trunk of a cherry tree. While he was spinning this latest loop, the door of the house opened, and out came Mrs. Pratt carrying a folding chair, followed by Grandpa carrying his stick, and between them quite a number of useful articles such as a newspaper, a footstool, and a cup of coffee. Mrs. Pratt placed a chair underneath the cherry tree. Grandpa sat in it, decided he wanted to face the other side of the garden, and got up again with groans and great difficulty and some tugging and pulling by Mrs. Pratt. "It's not my legs," Grandpa complained, kicking his stick and the newspaper in all directions. "It's my knees that are stiff. Nothing wrong with the rest of me at all." I know, Grandpa," Mrs. Pratt soothed him. "Mrs. Brown and Mr. Duke and Major Tuckett and the Bishop all say the same. No, they don't, roared Grandpa. They've all got leg trouble, all the lot of them. I've seen them. There's nothing wrong with my legs, it's just my knees. Yes, Grandpa, said Mrs. Pratt, putting his coffee cup into his hands. Spid shot up the tree into the branches above and sat looking down on Grandpa, who waited only for Henry's mother to reach the house before calling her back again to pick up his paper. It was a pity, Spid thought, that the old gentleman could not do these things for himself. All he needed, after all, was something like a rope to hang on to and give him the balance. And then he would not have to worry other people to wait on him, especially if it were true that only his knees prevented him from getting around without help. And if it were only the question of a rope, very carefully, Spid began to unwind a length of strong silken thread above Grandpa's head. It was his very best quality of web, and it descended inch by inch onto Grandpa, shining in the morning sun. At the same time, a large, fat bluebottle came droning across the garden and became interested in the old man sitting in his dressing gown underneath the cherry tree with his coffee cup in his hand. The note in its buzzing altered. It lost interest in the cherry blossom and began to make noisy circles round Grandpa's saucer. Grandpa and Spid caught sight of it at the same moment. Spid made a lunge towards it, and Grandpa swiped. His swipe missed the blue bottle, but cut right through Spid's beautiful new thread, from the end of which Spid dropped with a plop into his coffee cup. There came a roar like a wounded elephant that echoed round the garden as Grandpa yelled, "Help, Mary! Mrs. Gridley! Mrs. Gridley! Mary! Some of you, come out here now! There's a spider in my coffee cup!" Before help came, Grandpa had flung the contents of the cup into the nearest flower bed. Spid had extricated himself and was running with all 8 legs to dry himself on a brick beside the path. Seeing its chance, a thrush pounced down, and he only escaped sudden death in the nick of time. The thrush tapped its beak on the brick and flew away. All in all, Spid felt safer up the tree. Panting with nervous exhaustion, he ran across the grass to the back of the cherry tree and scuttled up the trunk, just as Mrs. Pratt and Mrs. Gridley arrived in answer to Grandpa's cries. New coffee was brought, Grandpa's chair was turned round, he was helped to his feet and helped to sit down again. "It's my knees," Grandpa grumbled. "What I need is a rope to pull on." There, thought Spid scornfully, I could have told him that before. This time, he waited until the coffee was drunk and the saucer put down on the grass. The blue bottle stayed away and Grandpa slept. Spid wove a still more splendid rope and was careful to keep it coiled on top of the branch until it was long enough to test. When he uncoiled it and let it down, he dangled on the end of it just within reach of Grandpa's hand, and by wrapping up his legs and arms and making himself into a tight round ball, Spid looked like nothing so much as the bobble on the end of a bell pull. Then he went to sleep like Grandpa, gently swaying to and fro in the warm summer air. When he woke, the old gentleman was just stirring. Grandpa looked round the garden from underneath his fluffy white eyebrows and spread his whiskers in an enormous yawn. He thought it must be time to go in for dinner and began impatiently to tap his stick on the ground and to look for Henry's mother or Mrs. Gridley to come and help him out of his chair. But it was not so late as Grandpa thought, and Mrs. Pratt and Mrs. Gridley were busy on the other side of the house. They were not even thinking about Grandpa, and he suspected it. He began to kick his heels in the grass. After 5 minutes, when still nobody came, he began to shout, but not very loudly, because he was afraid of bringing out the lady next door, who liked nothing better than to put her head over the wall and have a chat. She even called him Grandpa. Sure enough, her head appeared just when he did not want in the least to see her. "Aren't they coming then?" she asked sympathetically. "Can't you get up, Grandpa? Shall I come and help you?" "No," roared Grandpa. "I can get up by myself. I don't want any help. There's nothing wrong with my legs. I'll telephone them," the neighbour said soothingly, and disappeared. Grandpa made a tremendous effort to get out of his chair. One arm flailed about and caught hold of Spid's rope. He snatched at it, lost it, and snatched again, pulled, found it, and hauled himself triumphantly onto his feet. "There," said Spid kindly. "I knew you could do it if you tried." "And what's your name?" Grandpa demanded, looking at the rope and at Spid crouching on the end of it. "Spid, Grandpa, sir." "My name is Spid." "Well, you're a bright fellow," Grandpa announced admiringly. "I never knew a spider as bright as you before. You hang around, see? I could do with a chap like you among all these dunderheads." "Yes, Grandpa, sir," said Spid dutifully. Grandpa stumped towards the house while Spid wound up his thread into the branches of the cherry tree and waited. In the afternoon, Grandpa came out again. He settled down quite cheerfully in his seat under the cherry tree and looked around for Spid. "Spid, Spiddy, where's that spider? Where the devil are you, Spid?" "I'm here, Grandpa, sir," said Spid, looking down on Grandpa from the branch where he had been resting. "That's right then, you stay there till you're wanted," ordered Grandpa, settling himself in the sun with the newspaper in his hands. It soon fell forward over his eyes, and he went to sleep. "Don't you move, Spider," Grandpa said just before he dropped off. "I shall need you presently to help me to get onto my feet." "Yes, Grandpa, sir," Spid replied smartly. "It's not my legs, it's my knees," Grandpa muttered with his face falling into the pages of the newspaper. "There's nothing wrong with my legs." Spid had already gone back to sleep. He was well on the road to making friends with Grandpa, besides which he thought this was a very pleasant way to spend a summer's afternoon. He was awakened much too soon by a roar from down below. "Spid, Spid, where the devil is that spider? Where are you, Spid?" "I'm here, Grandpa, sir," said Spid, peering over the branch. "Well, come up and help me get down," ordered Grandpa. Come down and help me get up." Spid unwound one of his best ropes and slowly let himself down on top of Grandpa, while Grandpa looked up and watched him doing it, not exactly impatiently, but jiggling his toes and fingers in an impatient kind of way. Spid thought he might have shown some more pleasing manners. This time, he did not curl himself into a ball, but tied the end into a knot and scrambled back onto the branch of the tree, holding onto the rope by a fine gold thread. "Is that long enough, Grandpa, sir?" he asked politely, lowering the rope into Grandpa's hand. "Yes, I think so. More. No, not so much. Yes. No. Yes. Now I've got it." "Thank you," said Spid pointedly. "My pleasure," said Grandpa, pulling himself to his feet. "I know," said Spid, "but it is my rope. Thank you. Thank you." At each thank you, he gave the rope a little jerk. When this had no effect, he twitched it out of Grandpa's hands, and the old gentleman sat down again very suddenly in his chair. "Why, you double-crossing, crafty little devil," roared Grandpa, just as Henry came through the gate on his return from fishing. "What's the matter, Grandpa?" he called, seeing his grandfather's kicking feet. "Do you want to get up? I'll help you." "I don't want your help. I can manage perfectly well by myself," shouted Grandpa. "It's that perishing spider up there in the tree. One minute he's getting me up, and then the next he's letting me down. Just wait till I get hold of him." Henry saw Spid crouching on the cherry tree branch like an 8-legged miniature jaguar. He saw the malice in Spid's shiny black eyes and the coils of the beautiful rope he had been weaving. "Oh, Spiddy," he reproached him, "what have you been doing to Grandpa?" In answer, Spid quietly lowered the rope, which arrived in Grandpa's hand. The old gentleman snatched at it and held it so tightly that the branch above quivered. "There, you see," Grandpa announced. "Who said I couldn't get myself out of my chair?" He stood there in triumph, facing Henry. "I think you are wonderfully clever, Grandpa," said Henry. "That's right. So I am," said Grandpa, beaming. "And so is Spid," said Henry. "Thank you, Spid. Thank you," said Spid. But he was speaking to Grandpa, not to Henry. "There you are. Now you know," said Grandpa, preparing to pick up his walking stick. Spid slackened the rope, and immediately Grandpa fell back into his chair on top of the newspaper. "You wait till I get hold of you, you impudent, double-crossing little devil," Grandpa raged, snatching at the silken rope which Spid was twitching and dancing a few inches above his head. "He only wants you to say thank you, Grandpa," Henry reproached him, as the rope was rapidly wound upwards to disappear among the branches. "What? Where? Why? What do you mean?" said Grandpa, quite flabbergasted. The rope came down again and tickled his eyebrows. Grandpa grabbed at it unsuccessfully. "Spid!" pleaded Henry, and at last the spider stopped tormenting and lowered the rope fairly and squarely into Grandpa's hands. Grandpa hauled on it and pulled himself to his feet. "Thanks," he said sheepishly, aiming his word at the branches, but Spid was on the end of the rope. He lowered himself to the ground, put a thread round the end of Grandpa's stick, and twitched it into his hand. "My pleasure, Grandpa, sir," he said politely. Henry felt rather sore that Grandpa now regarded Spid as his very own and private property. First thing in the morning, while Henry was having his breakfast, the cry would go forth from Grandpa's bedroom, "Spid! Spid! Where the devil is that spider?" And Spid would obediently leave Henry's pocket and trot off to Grandpa's room to be welcomed with cries of, "So there you are, my little beauty, and how may you be this morning?" Grandpa's manners became much more pleasant in Spid's company. He even called Henry's mother "my dear." "But he shouldn't call Spid his spider," Henry complained bitterly. "He's my spider and he knows it. Spid knows it, I mean. And Grandpa does too. They're just playing each other up. The next thing is he'll be taking Spid home with him when he leaves here. Just you wait and see." "Oh, I'm sure he won't, dear," his mother said soothingly. "And just think how much more we are enjoying Grandpa's visit because of Spid. He's such a good little spider. He never gets in my way in the house. And if I lose a needle or drop a pin, he's after it in a minute. He's a dear little spider." Mrs. Gridley agreed. Spid polished her windows and kept his fly traps down behind the bath, where they got in nobody's way. He never allowed the sight of a cobweb to offend the family, although his webs were his pride and joy, and he knew he spun them better than any other spider in the world. But he would not allow any other spider to come into the house. Nearly everybody in Henry's home was his friend now. Chapter 5, Sick unto Death. For all his efforts to be helpful and agreeable, Spid found it almost impossible to make friends with Henry's father. Mr. Pratt was not afraid of spiders. He just thought they were completely, wholly and utterly unnecessary to a civilized society and did his best to exterminate them whenever one crossed his path. Henry had not exaggerated when he told Spid that his father would stamp on him at the earliest opportunity. Mr. Pratt would, and nearly did, on more than one occasion. Spid had to run for his life and only escaped by a mere hair's breadth. Don't be so ruthless, dear, Henry's mother pleaded. One of these spiders is Henry's pet, and he is such a dear, helpful little fellow. Huh, said Henry's father. Why can't he have a hamster for a pet, or a rabbit, or gerbils like other boys do? If I tried to make a pet of a spider when I was a boy. He is ever so useful to Grandpa too, Mrs. Pratt said hastily. He helps him up and down from his chair and... Grandpa always tells me he doesn't need helping, Mr. Pratt snapped. And I'm surprised at you, my dear Mary, for tolerating dirty insects like that around the house. All those legs. Why, Henry brings in enough dirt on too. Mrs. Gridley will be leaving us next. She likes Henry's spider, said Mrs. Pratt, and the spider helps her to do her work. Helps her to do her work, Mr. Pratt repeated, and burst out laughing. Well, that is a good one, I must say. Spid quivered with indignation in the mouse hole to which he had retired. But he knew it was useless to be angry with Henry's father. He must be persuaded, like Henry's mother and like Mrs. Gridley, that some spiders were clever, noble, and useful creatures, and all the better for having 8 legs instead of 2. It was all the more legs to be useful with. He set about being useful to Henry's father. When a storm of wind wrenched the runner bean sticks away from the wall, Spid climbed up with the utmost care and diligence and secured them so that they would not blow down again. But Henry's father did not notice the webs that bound them to the wall nails. He thought he had just been lucky in losing no bean rows when most of his neighbours' plants were dashed to the ground. It quite escaped his notice that Spid had killed the flies on the cabbages, frightened away the white butterflies that laid their eggs in the Brussels sprout plants, and made many a weary journey to the fence and back, carrying greedy fat caterpillars and dropping them through a knothole to the other side. It took up all his time while Henry was at school. Grandpa Pratt had gone home again. Once Spid was pounced on by a robin and shaken nearly to death. It took all the strength of his 8 powerful feet to kick himself free, and even then the robin hunted him up and down the bean rows till a wandering cat threatened him in his turn, and he flew away. The cat looked scornfully at Spid, dabbed at him with a shrouded paw, and strolled out of the garden. Spid waited till it went to sleep on top of a wall, and then spun so many webs around it that the cat took the whole afternoon and 6 washings to get its fur free of them again. It is Spid that keeps your vegetables so clear from flies, Henry pointed out to his father when they strolled round the garden on a Sunday morning. Really? Said his father disbelievingly. That's what you think. One fat, filthy spider? You must be joking. Spid was so indignant that he stayed away from the kitchen garden for nearly a week, and the flies and the caterpillars all came back again. Mr. Pratt sprayed the place with insecticide just when Spid had made up his mind that he could not bear to see such an infestation. He spent a whole night catching the flies and eating them, and by the morning he had swallowed so much insecticide that he was feeling very ill. By the time Henry came back from school, Spid was very nearly dead. Oh, Spiddy, what's wrong with you? Henry cried when he found the pale, shrivelled and suffering body of his little friend huddled up beside his pillow. Bellyache, murmured Spid, and he turned a shade paler still. It's awful. The stuff came off the sprouts. Henry did not hesitate. He wrapped Spid tenderly in a handkerchief and bicycled off with him to the vet. It was late in the day and the surgery was empty. Henry was able to walk straight in and lay the spider's body on the table of the veterinary surgeon, Mr. Pawsey. And what have we here? Said the vet, looking with some surprise at the suffering spider. There's nothing wrong with that thing, is there? I should think he's a pretty large fellow when he's stretched out. Spid put forward one quivering leg and then another, finally followed by 6 more. Each leg was shivering and cold and looked ready to drop off the pale and shivering body in the middle. The shiny round eyes were nearly closed. "I see," said the vet, looking concerned. "It is in a bad way, isn't it? And what do you suppose has happened to it?" "Bellyache," said Henry anxiously. "It has been eating the flies in my dad's vegetable garden, and Dad has been spraying with insecticide, so the insects would have died anyway. Only Spid didn't know that, you see. He only wanted to be helpful." "Bad luck," said the vet. "He told Spid to put out his tongue." The tongue that Spid was at last persuaded to put out was only a shadow of the bright pink, lively little flag he usually displayed. He took it back again very quickly and tightly shut his eyes. For the last time, thought Henry, in an agony of despair. "Can't you do anything for him?" he asked the vet beseechingly. "Well, I could give him something," Mr. Pawsey admitted thoughtfully. "But it is a question of persuading him to take it. It tastes very disagreeable, and it might make him sick." "Do you hear that, Spid?" Henry said firmly, spreading out his handkerchief and placing the spider in the middle of it. "It's up to you, Spiddy. Do you want to die, or—" For an answer, Spid opened both his glazing eyes, even as his 8 legs sagged and crumpled underneath his body. A small, pale mouth came open, first hesitatingly, and then wider and wider. The tongue was almost white by now. Henry felt sure he was dying, but Mr. Pawsey did not wait long enough to take any chances. He snatched a bottle off a shelf, measured 4 drops into a salt spoon, and tipped them down the tiny, gaping throat. Spid gave a tremendous gulp, then slithered rather than ran down the table leg, shuffled across the floor into the darkest corner of the room, and disappeared. "He's gone," gulped Henry, nearly in tears. No, give him a chance," said Mr. Pawsey. "We got the stuff into him, and he's a brave little chap. Just wait a moment and see what happens." Henry waited, and every minute seemed an hour long. At last, just as he was about to drop on hands and knees and scour every inch of the wainscot for that beloved little dead body, there came a movement in a far corner. And that's where I'm going to leave it.